the Snowman of North Dakota. I never believed in legends or the supernatural. Growing up in Fargo, North Dakota, amidst the endless stretches of prairie and the biting cold of winter, I found solace in the rational explanations of the world. But that belief was irrevocably shattered one fateful winter in 1887, when I encountered something that defied all reason, a being that should not exist, yet was as real as the snowflakes that blanketed our land. My name is Thomas Reed, and I was 28 years old, working as a lumberjack in the remote northern forests of our state. The winters here were unforgiving, turning the landscape into a monochromatic expanse of white, where the only sounds were the crunch of snow underfoot and the occasional howl of a lone wolf. Life was simple, governed by the rhythm of the seasons and the demands of our trade. But that winter was different, marked by an eerie stillness and whispers of an ancient presence lurking in the deep woods. It was early December when the first signs began. We had been hauling logs back to the mill for weeks, enduring the harshest cold I had ever experienced. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the snow-covered ground, my fellow lumberjacks and I gathered around a makeshift fire to warm our frozen bones. The conversation was light, filled with tales of past winters and the occasional joke to lift our spirits. But there was an undercurrent of unease, a shared sense that something was amiss. That night, as I trudged back to camp, the silence of the forest was unnerving. The moon was a thin crescent, barely illuminating the path ahead. Suddenly, a soft crunching noise echoed through the trees, different from the usual sounds of shifting snow or the distant calls of wildlife. I paused, straining to hear, but the noise ceased as abruptly as it had started. Shaking off the unease, I continued my walk, the cold seeping into my bones despite my layers of clothing. The next morning, we found footprints unlike any animal we had seen before, large, elongated impressions that seemed to stride with purpose. Heading deeper into the forest, they were too large for a bear, too organized for a human, something else entirely. The group gathered to discuss the discovery, debating whether it was the work of a new predator or perhaps a prankster taking advantage of our isolation. But none could explain the strange size and the seemingly deliberate pattern of the tracks. Days turned into weeks, and the occurrences grew more frequent. More footprints appeared, each one leading further into the uncharted depths of the forest. Some nights, we heard faint laughter carried on the wind, an eerie sound that sent chills down our spines. The local townsfolk whispered about the Snowman of North Dakota, a mythical creature said to roam the woods during the coldest months, preying on those who dared to venture too far from the safety of civilization. I was skeptical, but curiosity got the better of me. One evening, armed with nothing but a lantern and my axe, I decided to follow the latest set of footprints, determined to uncover the truth. The forest was dense, the trees towering overhead like silent sentinels guarding ancient secrets. The snow was thick, making every step a laborious effort. As I ventured deeper, the sounds of the night grew louder, rustling leaves, snapping twigs, and that unmistakable, haunting laughter. Hours passed, and the cold became unbearable. My fingers were numb, my breath visible in the frigid air. Just as I was about to turn back, I stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood a figure, tall and imposing, its body covered in thick, matted fur that blended seamlessly with the surrounding snow. It resembled a human in form, but grotesquely distorted, its limbs elongated, its face obscured by layers of snow and ice, eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Frozen with fear, I watched as the creature moved with a deliberate grace, each step leaving deep imprints in the snow. It raised its arms, and the air around us seemed to shimmer with a malevolent energy. The laughter intensified, now a cacophony of tormented souls crying out in despair. I could feel an overwhelming sense of dread, a palpable fear that clawed at my mind, threatening to consume me. Summoning every ounce of courage, I raised my axe, hoping to defend myself against this nightmarish apparition. But the creature simply stood there, staring into my eyes with an intensity that rendered me speechless. Time seemed to distort, each second stretching into an eternity as I faced the embodiment of our darkest fears. The air grew colder, frost forming on my eyelashes and coating my skin in ice. Suddenly, the ground beneath us trembled, and the forest around us seemed to come alive with shadowy figures emerging from the trees, ghostly apparitions of soldiers and settlers, their faces twisted in anguish and rage. The Wendigo, as some legends called it, had summoned the spirits of those lost to the harsh winters, creating a phantasmagorical nightmare that blurred the lines between the living and the dead. The creature lunged forward, its claws reaching out toward me, and I swung my axe in a desperate attempt to fend it off. The impact was surreal, the blade passing through the creature as if it were made of smoke and ice. Pain shot through my body, and I fell to the ground, the forest around me dissolving into a vortex of swirling snow and shadows. When I awoke, the dawn was breaking, the first rays of sunlight piercing through the trees and melting the remnants of the night's horrors. My body ached, every muscle screaming from the cold and exhaustion. I staggered to my feet, heart pounding, and made my way back to camp, my mind reeling from the encounter. The footprints had vanished, leaving no trace of the creature or the spirits it had summoned. The next day, the atmosphere in the camp was heavy with fear and uncertainty. The men avoided discussing what had happened, but the fear was palpable in their eyes and the way they went about their work. We had all glimpsed the Snowman of North Dakota, and its presence had left an indelible mark on our souls. In the weeks that followed, the strange phenomena continued. The laughter returned, louder and more insistent, echoing through the forest and keeping us awake at night. Some men refused to leave the camp, paralyzed by fear, while others became reckless, driven by a desperate need to confront the nightmare that haunted us. It was a descent into madness, a collective unraveling as the legends of old seemed to take on a terrifying reality. One evening, as the sun set and the shadows lengthened, Sarah, a quiet, introspective woman who had always been the voice of reason, decided to take a walk alone, hoping to find some clarity amidst the chaos. She never returned. Panic erupted as we realized she had fallen victim to the creature. Her lifeless body found the next morning, frozen and contorted in a grotesque pose that mirrored the snowman's own twisted form. The tragedy of that winter left us broken, our spirits crushed by the relentless fear and loss. The Snowman of North Dakota became a living nightmare, a specter of our darkest fears made flesh. The stories of the past had become our reality, the legends of the Wendigo and the restless spirits intertwining to create a horror that none of us could escape. Years later, long after the war had ended and peace had returned to the land, the story of our encounter became a part of local folklore, a cautionary tale told around fires and in hushed tones during the coldest nights. The Snowman of North Dakota remains a symbol of the untamed wilderness and the darkness that can lie within, a reminder that some legends are born from truth, and that the spirits of the past can never truly be laid to rest. I left North Dakota soon after that winter, seeking to bury the memories of what we had endured. But no matter how far I traveled, the image of the snowman, his hollow eyes and twisted form, lingered in my mind, a ghostly reminder of the thin line between reality and nightmare. The lessons learned from that harrowing experience stayed with me, shaping my understanding of fear and the unknown. Sometimes, during the quiet moments of winter, I catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadowy figure moving against the snowfall, eyes burning with an unnatural light. It's a chilling reminder that evil can take many forms, and that the spirits of the lost still roam the frozen landscapes, forever seeking vengeance and peace that eludes them. So, as you brave the cold and gather with your loved ones this winter, remember the story of the Snowman of North Dakota. Cherish each moment, embrace the warmth of your hearth, and heed the warnings whispered by the wind. For in the heart of every winter lies both beauty and terror, and it is our duty to protect the light that keeps the darkness at bay. Remember our story, a haunting reminder that even in the most serene of landscapes, shadows can lurk, waiting to descend upon us when we least expect it. Story number 2. The Villisca Axe Murder House, Shadows of Winter. I always thought the Villisca Axe Murder House was just another macabre chapter in American folklore. A grim reminder of the horrors that can unfold in the quietest of places. Growing up in Des Moines, Iowa, I heard stories of that fateful night on countless occasions. But it wasn't until I stood before its imposing facade one frigid winter night that the true weight of those legends settled upon me. My name is Daniel Brooks, and I'm a paranormal investigator with a penchant for uncovering the truths behind the most haunted locations in the country. The Villisca Axe Murder House had long been on my list, a notorious site where, on the night of June 9, 1912, a family of 6 and 2 guests were brutally murdered with an axe. Decades later, the house stood as a relic of unspeakable violence, attracting thrill-seekers and ghost enthusiasts alike. Yet, something about its history and the lingering sorrow in its walls drew me in deeper than mere curiosity. It was December 1987 when I decided to visit Villisca. The winter had been particularly harsh, with temperatures plummeting and snowdrifts covering the landscape in a thick, unyielding white. The road to Villisca was a treacherous path, winding through dense forests and across icy patches that tested both my resolve and my vehicle's endurance. As I approached the house, the sight that greeted me was both mesmerizing and terrifying. Its Victorian architecture stood stark against the snow-covered grounds, windows dark and unwelcoming, the once vibrant paint now faded and peeling. Parking my truck a safe distance away, I grabbed my gear, a high-definition camera, a digital voice recorder, infrared sensors, and my trusted EMF meter. The air was biting cold, each breath visible in the frigid night as I made my way toward the house. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of snow under my boots and the occasional rustle of wildlife seeking shelter from the storm. As I approached the front door, an inexplicable chill ran down my spine. The house seemed to emanate a presence, a sorrowful aura that weighed heavily on my senses. I paused, taking a moment to compose myself before pushing open the heavy wooden door. It creaked ominously, revealing a grand foyer adorned with decaying wallpaper and dust-covered furniture. The fireplace stood cold, its mantel cluttered with remnants of past lives, broken picture frames, cracked mirrors, and old, moth-eaten drapes. I set up my equipment, methodically placing sensors in strategic locations to capture any paranormal activity. The temperature inside the house was unnaturally cold, my EMF meter fluctuating erratically as if reacting to unseen forces. I began my exploration, moving cautiously from room to room, documenting every detail. Each space held its own story, a haunting testament to the lives abruptly ended within these walls. In the dining room, I found the remnants of the horrific event, the table still set for dinner, silverware tarnished and plates cracked. It was as if time had stood still, preserving the final moments before tragedy struck. I placed my voice recorder on the table, the idea that perhaps the echoes of that night still lingered within these walls driving me forward. As midnight approached, the house seemed to come alive with an eerie energy. The air grew colder, and an oppressive silence settled over the rooms I traversed. It was then that I began to hear it, a faint, mournful wail echoing through the halls. My heart raced as I followed the sound, my footsteps muffled by the thick layer of snow outside. The wail led me to the master bedroom, a spacious room with a large 4-poster bed and windows overlooking the snowy landscape. The moonlight streamed through the glass, casting long shadows that danced across the room. I set up my camera, aiming it toward the window, hoping to capture any spectral activity. Suddenly, the temperature dropped further, my breath visible in the frigid air as a figure materialized before me. It was a woman, her form translucent and ethereal, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. She stood motionless, her gaze fixed on the window as if yearning for something beyond her reach. I could feel her pain, the weight of her loss pressing down on me. My recorder picked up a faint whisper, barely audible, but unmistakably human. "Help us," she murmured, her voice cracking with despair. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. She turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting mine with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. "We're trapped," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can't leave." Before I could respond, the room seemed to distort, the walls stretching and warping as if the very fabric of reality was tearing apart. The other spirits began to emerge, their forms flickering like faulty projections. The men and women of the family, their faces contorted in pain and fear, stood around the room, reliving the moments of their gruesome deaths. One by one, they approached me, their eyes filled with a mix of anguish and desperation. The youngest child, a little girl with wide, terrified eyes, reached out to me, her hand passing through my own. "You have to help us," she pleaded, her voice echoing through the chamber. I felt a surge of empathy, my rational mind battling against the overwhelming emotions that threatened to consume me. "What can I do?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the cacophony of sorrowful whispers. The spirits began to recount their final moments, their voices blending into a haunting chorus. The father, wielding an axe, the mother trying to protect her children, and the guests caught in the brutal onslaught, all reliving the terror of that night. The air grew thick with their memories, the house a living repository of their pain and suffering, determined to bring peace to their restless souls. I sought out the history of the Villisca axe murder house. I learned about the mysterious killer, never caught or identified, and the rumors of curses and dark forces at play. Some believed the house itself was a beacon for evil, a place where the veil between the living and the dead was unnaturally thin. Armed with this knowledge, I decided to perform a cleansing ritual, hoping to break the cycle of violence and release the trapped spirits. I gathered candles, salt, and holy water, setting them around the perimeter of the house to create a protective barrier. I recited prayers and chants, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my insides. As the ritual progressed, the spirits became more agitated, their sorrow turning to anger. The temperature plummeted further, ice forming on the windows and frost creeping along the walls. The apparitions of the family grew more defined, their eyes blazing with a desperate need for release. Suddenly, the room was engulfed in a blinding light, the candles flickering wildly as the energy in the room reached a fever pitch. The spirits wailed in unison, their forms flickering between solid and spectral as they fought against the cleansing force. The air vibrated with the intensity of their torment, the boundaries of the house stretching and bending under the strain. In the midst of the chaos, the figure of the woman from the master bedroom stood before me, her expression one of profound sorrow. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice softening as the light began to pierce through the darkness. "Find peace." With a final, collective scream, the spirits began to dissipate, their forms dissolving into the air as the house returned to a state of eerie stillness. The oppressive chill lifted, replaced by a calm that felt both foreign and comforting. The cleansing ritual had worked, freeing the souls trapped within the walls of the Villisca axe murder house. Exhausted but relieved, I gathered my equipment and made my way out of the house, the first light of dawn breaking through the night's darkness. The snow had ceased, leaving the landscape serene and untouched, a stark contrast to the turmoil I had just witnessed. Back at my base camp, I reflected on the events of the night. The Villisca axe murder house stood silent once more, its tragic history finally finding a semblance of peace. The stories of the winter ghosts, the cold chills, and the spectral apparitions had transformed into a tale of redemption and closure. Years have passed since that winter night, but the memory of the Villisca axe murder house remains vivid in my mind. I've continued my work as a paranormal investigator, but the experience in Villisca taught me the profound impact that unresolved tragedy can have on both the living and the dead. It reinforced my belief that some spirits yearn not for vengeance, but for release and understanding. The Villisca Axe murder house continues to draw curious visitors, each hoping to catch a glimpse of the restless souls that once haunted its halls. But those who know the truth understand that the house holds a peace that was hard-earned, a testament to the power of compassion and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable horror. So, as you hear the stories of Villisca and its haunted legacy, remember the voices of those lost souls and the darkness that once consumed them. Cherish each moment, honor the memories of those who came before us, and remain vigilant in the face of the unknown. For even in the most peaceful of places, shadows can linger, waiting to remind us of the fragility of life and the enduring power of the past. Story number 3. Whispers of the Wendigo. I always believed that the legends of my childhood were just stories to scare kids into behaving. Growing up in the remote stretches of northern Minnesota, tales of the Wendigo were as common as the snowflakes that blanketed our small town every winter. They were whispered around campfires, shared during long nights when the cold seemed to seep into your bones. But nothing prepared me for the winter of 1995, when the Wendigo's whispers became my waking nightmare. My name is Jack Lawson, and I was a wildlife biologist with a passion for studying the elusive creatures that thrived in the harshest climates. The Northwoods had always been my sanctuary, a place where I could lose myself in the wilderness and escape the chaos of city life. But that winter, the forest held secrets darker than any I had ever uncovered. It was late November when I received the call. A colleague from the University of Minnesota had gone missing while researching predator behavior in the Northern Territories. Her name was Dr. Emily Harris, a dedicated researcher known for her relentless pursuit of knowledge. The last known location of her expedition was deep within the uncharted territories of the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. Concerned for her safety, I volunteered to lead the search team. We set out on December 1st, armed with supplies, maps, and a determination to find Emily. The journey was arduous, the snowstorm that rolled in making progress slow and treacherous. Days turned into nights, and the isolation of the wilderness began to take its toll on the team. The howling winds seemed to carry whispers, voices that echoed through the trees, speaking in a language long forgotten. One night, as we huddled around the fire in our makeshift camp, Tom, our lead tracker, recounted the legend of the Wendigo. They say it's a spirit of the forest, a creature born from greed and desperation, he said, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames. In times of famine, some tribes believed that the Wendigo would take over a person, turning them into a monster with an insatiable hunger for human flesh. I listened, skepticism clouding my mind. Legends were just that, stories meant to explain the unexplainable. Yet, there was an unease that settled over me, a feeling that we were not alone in the vast, frozen wilderness. On December 10th, we stumbled upon Emily's camp. The site was eerily quiet, her tent torn apart from the inside, supplies scattered and half-consumed. There were no signs of a struggle, no bloodshed, only the remnants of a desperate hunt. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only unanswered questions. Determined to continue the search, we pressed deeper into the forest. The days were short, the nights long and unforgiving. As the temperature plummeted, our progress slowed, and the team's morale began to wane. One evening, as the sun set behind the snow-covered pines, Sarah, our medic, reported hearing strange noises outside the camp. Footsteps crunching through the snow, whispers that seemed to follow her wherever she went. "We need to stay vigilant," I urged, my voice betraying the fear I tried to mask. "We're not dealing with just the elements here." But fear was already taking root. One night, as we sat around the fire, the wind howling like a wounded beast, we heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching our camp. Tom grabbed his rifle, his hand shaking as he prepared to defend us. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until a figure emerged from the darkness. It was tall and gaunt, the skin pale and mottled, blending seamlessly with the snow-covered landscape. Its eyes were hollow, burning with an unnatural hunger that sent chills down my spine. The creature moved with a silent grace, its presence radiating a malevolent energy that made the air grow thick with tension. "Stay back," Tom whispered, his voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. The creature paused, his hollow gaze fixed on us. In that moment, I felt a surge of dread, primal fear that clawed at my mind. The Wendigo was no mere legend, it was real, and it was here. We stood frozen, unable to move, as the creature began to approach. Its movements were deliberate, each step bringing it closer, the snow beneath its feet untouched by the frostbite of winter. The team's nerves were frayed, their faces pale with fear, but there was no turning back. We were trapped, alone in the heart of the wilderness, facing a nightmare that had long been dismissed as folklore. As the Wendigo drew near, the temperature dropped even further, the air turning frigid and sharp. His eyes bore into mine, and I felt an overwhelming sense of despair and hunger emanating from its very being. I knew we had to act, but the sheer terror of the situation left me paralyzed. Suddenly, a burst of determination surged through me. "We need to fight," I said, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my insides. "We can't let it take us." Tom nodded. Rallying the team, we began to make our stand, firing our rifles into the night. The Wendigo moved with unnatural speed, dodging bullets effortlessly, its form flickering like a shadow in the storm. Each shot seemed to only enrage it further, fueling its insatiable hunger. Desperation took over as the creature closed in, its claws reaching out to claim us as its prey. The team fought valiantly, but one by one, they fell, their screams echoing through the night as the Wendigo tore through us with brutal efficiency. I watched in horror as my friends were taken, their lives extinguished in a frenzy of fear and pain. With my team decimated and the creature inches away, I knew there was no escape. The Wendigo's eyes locked onto mine, and in that moment, I felt an overwhelming urge to succumb to its hunger. But something deep within me resisted, a flicker of humanity that refused to be extinguished. Summoning every ounce of strength, I grabbed my rifle and aimed directly at the creature's heart. "You won't take me," I declared, my voice cracking with determination. The Wendigo let out a guttural growl, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundation of the forest. It lunged forward, its claws slashing through the air. I fired, the bullet piercing its chest, but it did little to slow it down. The creature recoiled, its form shimmering as it struggled against the damage. But it was still a formidable foe. In a last-ditch effort, I grabbed a heavy branch from a nearby tree, swinging it with all my might. The branch connected with the Wendigo's head, and for a moment, staggered, its eyes losing some of their eerie glow. I took advantage of the opportunity, sprinting toward the edge of the clearing, the creature following relentlessly. The snowstorm had intensified, the wind whipping around me, making it nearly impossible to see. I pushed myself to the limit, the cold biting into my flesh as I ran for my life. The sound of the Wendigo's footsteps behind me was a constant reminder of the terror that pursued me. Just as I thought I couldn't run any further, I burst through the trees and found myself at the edge of a frozen lake. The ice was thin, but I had no choice. The Wendigo was almost upon me, its presence closing the distance between us. With a final surge of adrenaline, I dove into the icy water, the cold enveloping me in a numbing embrace. I struggled to stay afloat, the Wendigo's hands reaching for me beneath the surface. Panic surged through me as I fought against the freezing water, my mind racing for a way to escape. But the ice below me began to crack, and I knew that any misstep could spell certain death. With sheer determination, I pushed myself toward the center of the lake, hoping to find solid ice to climb out onto. The Wendigo was relentless, its grip tightening as it pulled me back into the depths. But I refused to give in, my will to survive overpowering the fear that threatened to consume me. Finally, I reached a section of ice that held firm, and with a desperate effort, I hauled myself out of the water, gasping for breath and shivering uncontrollably. The Wendigo stopped at the edge of the lake, its form fading into the snowstorm as if it had never been there. Exhausted and alone, I collapsed onto the ice, the storm finally beginning to subside. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting a pale light over the desolate landscape. I was the sole survivor of that harrowing night, the Wendigo's wrath leaving me with scars that would never fade. The search team was never found, their lives lost to the darkness that lurked within the winter woods. In the aftermath, I struggled to come to terms with what had happened. The legend of the Wendigo had taken on a new, terrifying reality, and the line between myth and nightmare had been irrevocably blurred. The creature was more than just a story. It was a manifestation of humanity's darkest impulses, a reminder of the thin line between survival and savagery. Years have passed since that dreadful winter, but the memory of the Wendigo remains etched in my mind, a constant reminder of the horrors that can emerge when desperation takes hold. I've dedicated my life to studying the legends and folklore of indigenous cultures, seeking to understand the deeper meanings behind these terrifying tales. Sometimes, during the coldest nights, I find myself staring out into the snow-covered wilderness, the wind whispering through the trees like the haunted voices of the lost. I wonder if the Wendigo still roams the northern forests, forever searching for those who dare to challenge its insatiable hunger.